Now, the protection of whistleblowers has come under the spotlight in recent months and was brought into sharp focus by the assassination of the Gauteng health manager, Babita Deokoran, in 2021. Many whistleblowers continue to be victimized and hounded from their workplaces despite their selfless acts. Some of them have had to flee the country to find safety in other places. Let's explore this matter further now. I have a panel of two guests, Cynthia Stempel, the Executive Director of the Whistleblower House, and the Deputy General Secretary or Secretary General of the South African Council of Churches, Reverend Mzwandile Molo. Reverend and Ms. Stempel, good afternoon. Welcome to today, and thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Let me begin with you, Cynthia. Tomorrow, the Whistleblower House, together with the South African Council of Churches, are collaborating in holding a webinar about what you've described as a critical role of whistleblowers. Why this webinar now? Cynthia, please unmute your mic. We can't hear you. We can see you speaking, but we can't hear you.
My apologies. Thank you very much for the opportunity, Dan, and for inviting us here. Why now is the question you're asking. It is a really critical time, a point in time of where we are in our country, but also for whistleblowers, in that we're not seeing the reforms come soon enough. We're not seeing legislation being changed. We see that whistleblowers are still being victimized in organizations, despite the recommendations that came out from the State Capture Commission a year ago. And we've now partnered with the South African Council of Churches, which they've actually initiated this forum and this webinar so that they can reach out to as many people as possible, especially the communities in the churches, to find ways of how can we assist them in order to keep them ethical and to keep them on a moral pathway, which whistleblowers follow when they speak out.
Okay, the church, for your part, Reverend Molo, why is the SACC involved in this at this time in our country?
Thank you very much, Brother Dan, and thank you and greetings to your listeners and viewers. Hi, Cynthia, again, good to see you. Brother Dan, the South African Council of Churches is committed to a process which we call anchoring democracy. And this process finds itself in our quest to make sure that South Africa and through the state have an ethical stance that allows us to live with transparency, to live with a sense of accountability, and also to live with this commitment to a society with ethical values that are supposed to drive all of us into a society where the state is not used as a space to loot from the people, but used as an instrument for the transformation of the people's lives. The South African Council of Churches, way back in 2017, but then issued what we call the unburdening panel. That was a precursor to what came to be known as the Zondo Commission, because in that report, we spoke to those who were willing to tell us the true story of what is happening behind closed doors in the fight to make sure that our state is not repurposed for nefarious means. And because of that commitment, then we are standing together, even with Whistleblower House, and with all in society, one, to say the following to society: the church cannot be silent when the coffers of this country are being looted in a massive scale. That makes it impossible for social change to happen. Secondly, we cannot stand by the side when those who are courageous, like the whistleblowers, stand up and say, no matter what the cost will be for us, we are going to stand and tell the truth and tell the nation what's happening to its resources. Thirdly, we want to make sure that this country is not taken into a deep moral crisis where people don't care about corruption, people don't care about theft. Therefore, to us, in a real way, this is a fight for the moral character of the country. And Whistleblower House, like all the other whistleblowers, have become courageous people who stand and say, whatever the cost, I will not be silent. And we're saying as the church, we're inspired by them, we're challenged by them, and we want to walk with them and work with them in society to change the moral character and also hold those who steal from our people accountable.
Judging by how some whistleblowers have suffered, that journey that you want to join the whistleblower house with Reverend Molo is not going to be an easy one. I mean, Cynthia, from your perspective yourself, you know all about whistleblowing. Government keeps on promising to protect whistleblowers. The president himself saying the right things a few months ago on some platform or another, but still you don't feel protected. Where are you being led down by government?
Thank you for the question, Dan. In many ways, promises were made already at the State Capture Commission where nothing was done. And then there was an opportunity last year when the state capture findings were released, final date being the 22nd of June, and nothing. And in many ways, government could have already taken action. We noted, though, in the last month that the Department of Justice has put out a discussion document for reforms in the whistleblower regime, and which we now are participating in and will provide some comments and a full review on it. So that we're quite happy with.
Does it give you hope? Does it give you hope? This little step you've just mentioned, Cynthia, does it give you hope?
It does. It's a change and it's a start, Dan, because all the time there's been talk and we've actually not seen any action. And now this is a start. There is some action. There has been extensive research done, and here's an opportunity for the public to comment. So we see it as a start. And yes, it does give some hope.
Yeah, and Reverend, I mean, the church will teach us, according to Scripture, that prayer is very fundamental to your faith. But the whistleblowers today need more than prayer. And besides supporting them in this webinar tomorrow, collaborating with the likes of the Whistleblower House, what do you think you can do more as churches, as men of God?
Thank you very much again for that question, Baden. I want to say 2 or 3 things, Baden. The first one is, as the SACC, we are totally convinced that those who are corrupt in our societies are not going to change because they have met a Damascus road. They haven't yet arrived there. They are going to change when we as society act together and put pressure on them to know that they will not hide anywhere in our country. We want to make sure that those in our churches who want to preach honesty, who want to preach accountability, make sure that in local churches, we tell our people that corruption is against who God is. It is counterproductive to the development of our country. And therefore, pressure must be put on those who are corrupt at the local level, but most importantly, also at the national level, with the advocacy that we can join with others who are fighting this, especially Whistleblower House now, where we are all able to work together and say, as long as we allow these things to be in a piece of paper somewhere, put in somebody's folder and put in somebody's shelf somewhere there, brother, we are not going to change. We in the church with others in society must stand up. Secondly, brother, we're also saying that this fight against corruption is a national effort. The whistleblowers, we are fortunate to have whistleblowers who stand up and say, at the risk of our livelihood, at the risk of our lives, at the risk of our own reputations, we are prepared to stand up. And it's high time that South Africans play their part, rather than to applaud them from the sidelines, to take to the stand and be in the field of play and work with them as hard as we can to make sure that this stops and this country is changed. Thirdly, Braden, what we're also saying, prayer without action has lost its power. Faith without works is not faith at all, but a hiding place for those who are faithless. Those who've got faith must then begin to act with the whistleblowers, from supporting them at the local level, from making sure that those who lose their livelihoods, people at the local level support them. Those who are next door neighbors become people who watch what is happening. And when they see suspicious cars that are driving around their areas, to alert the people, to protect the whistleblowers in their society. And also, then, to stand up with them and say, whoever you are, if you want to be a whistleblower, we are prepared as this local community, as the nation, to stand with you and say to the corrupt and those who abuse their power, if you touch a whistleblower, you are touching us, because you are not stealing the money that belongs to that whistleblower only as a citizen. You are stealing money that belongs to all of us. And if we work together, but then our prayer is going to be much more than words.
Prayer must be accompanied by action. I know you are having this webinar tomorrow. I don't want you to give up too much, so maybe people who are becoming aware now as they are watching us here on ENC8, DSTV channel 43, can say, I want to dip in and find out more about this webinar. But Cynthia, from a whistleblower house perspective, what kind of outcomes are you desiring to see tomorrow's webinar achieve for you in your quest to protect whistleblowers and also to encourage whistleblowing, because we've seen that it's needed in our country due to corruption?
Thank you, Dan. What we hope to see is, firstly, that many do sign on for the webinar. Two, it's from a moral and ethical perspective that we want to drive, that our own constitution states that we all have a right to speak up against corruption and that we need to take that moral stand. On the other hand, our constitution also states that we all have the human right to dignity. So whistleblowers who have suffered, they have that right to dignity. So it's for people to understand that when they're speaking up, they are not doing something wrong. They are actually following our constitution and following what is right as a citizen of South Africa. So what we hope tomorrow is that we can espouse what we are doing as Whistleblower House to assist whistleblowers and to encourage people that this is a duty, a civic duty as citizens, to speak out when they notice anything in their churches, in their streets, in their communities, in their schools, in their organizations, where they feel things aren't going right, money is being used for fraudulent means, there's some funny transactions taking place, that money that should have gone for fixing potholes is gone somewhere else, children's schools that's supposed to be built. So it's all those where people have noticed things but kept quiet because they said, it's not my business. And now as a citizen, we need to make it our business if we want to have a country that is stable and a country that is ethical and a country that we can all live in without fear and in safety.
Will there be more actions from your side, Reverend Molo, as the church community beyond the webinar tomorrow?
Thank you, Brother. Our conversation with Whistleblower House is that the webinar is almost kind of a consciousness-raising event that allows us to tell the nation, because to many people, we hear these things about whistleblowers, and in many ways, they become so courageous that they are so far removed from who we are, and as a result, we admire them from afar. We are trying to say to the people, these are ordinary human beings who are facing extraordinary challenges, yet choose to do the right thing. And the best way to support them is for us to stand with them in that consciousness-raising level. The second level we are engaging with them, it is to look at what are the things we can collaborate on advocacy. And part of the reason that we are reflecting on we wish to reflect on the document released by the Department of Justice, it is to let the nation know what the document says, to look for ourselves where the gaps are, to look at what it means that strengthens the work we do, so that we then, as society, can advocate. The SACC can stand beside our whistleblowers and advocate for the legal framework that makes sure that those who take this courageous step are not left alone. The last thing we want to say, Barbara, then, is we are going to pursue with them, guided by them, by the needs that are around them, to see at the local level what are the small little steps that local communities can do in supporting those whistleblowers in the municipalities. But then the greatest level of corruption happens in municipalities. What is it that we can do at the municipal level as religiously people of faith, both Christians and those of other faiths, to stand with them, make sure that we insulate them from the attacks, but build a momentum. That's the most point, but then a momentum against. That's what we want to do.
My last question to you, Reverend, and if you may be brief in answering it. The SACC, I remember, like millions of other South Africans, played a frontline role in the struggle against apartheid. I mean, the UDF is celebrating 40th anniversary shortly in August. It was founded in Cape Town. And the church community, church leaders were part of the front line under the UDF umbrella. Are you today, as a SACC, as a community of church, really going to put pressure on this government to make sure that whistleblowers are safe?
That's exactly the intention, but then, of our work. Not only starting with the whistleblowers, as I said, in 2017, we issued what we call an unburdening panel. We, as the church community and religion and faith community, must take the responsibility to say, this country needs to find a new trajectory into what it has to be. There are many people who criticize the SACC and churches for being too silent. And we have said we are doing some work. Perhaps what we need to do now is to raise the volume. It is to make society aware of the things we do and stand where people want us to stand, on the side of justice, on the side of the oppressed, against those who are exploiting and stealing from our people.
Thank you very much, Reverend Molo. Final word to you, Ms. Stempel. How do people join the webinar tomorrow?
We've been sending it out on websites, so I'm sure they can get it there. But
what's your website? What's the whistleblower website? The whistleblower house website?
Yes, www.whistleblowerhouse.org, and they can get all the information there if they inquire. And the SACC also will give their website, and they can get the information from there.
Okay, thanks. I want to make one promise, and I know my editor, Rajiv, is listening. I will be talking to one of you from the Whistleblower House on Thursday, here on Today, to find out what actually came out and what are the action steps. Because a little contribution we can make as the media is to keep this whistleblower matter front and center of the conscience of our nation. Thank you very much, Ms. Cynthia Stempel from the Whistleblower House, and Reverend Mzwandile Molo, the Deputy Secretary General of the South African Council of Churches, who are collaborating tomorrow, and they will be talking in a webinar, they'll be talking about the way forward to protect our whistleblowers.